The HOA thought they could scare me with paperwork and empty threats. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't just a homeowner, I was the chief of police in our county. And when they crossed the line, they were about to learn that law doesn't bend to petty power trips. Before we dive in, comment which country you're watching from. Let's see how far this story travels. It all began when Nancy Grant, our HOA president, started her latest authority show. She paraded around the neighborhood with a clipboard, waving bogus ordinance letters like she ran a government agency. Her voice carried across cul-de-sacs as she quoted rules that didn't exist, making elderly neighbors flinch and new families nervously sign whatever paper she handed them. Nancy loved control. She had this little queen bee energy, like every sidewalk crack and mailbox was under her personal jurisdiction. She claimed she had the power to fine me for parking violations on my own driveway, even though my truck was registered, inspected, and legally parked under State Vehicle Code 20-507-22, which clearly states HOAs cannot override municipal parking laws. When I refused to pay her so-called community citation, Nancy escalated. She knocked on my door with two men in polo shirts, calling themselves HOA compliance officers. They flashed badges that looked like they'd been printed at Office Depot. One of them even wore sunglasses indoors, trying to look official. "Sir, if you don't cooperate, we'll have to arrest you for non-compliance with HOA code," the taller one announced. That was my first red flag. Arrest. HOAs don't have arrest powers. Only sworn law enforcement officers do under State Penal Code 8L0.1. I let them finish their speech while my body camera, the same kind my deputies use, quietly recorded every word. I played along, acting confused, asking them to repeat their claims. Every lie they added only stacked more evidence against them. But inside, I was already planning my move, because if Nancy wanted to weaponize fake authority, I was ready to pull out the real kind. The two men strutted away from my porch like they'd scored a victory. I stood there watching them, arms crossed, memorizing their faces. They thought intimidation was going to work on me. They were wrong. That night, I reviewed the footage at my kitchen table. I zoomed in on the badges, cheap laminates, no state seals, no real agency numbers. I cross-referenced their names with our database. Nothing. Not even licensed security guards. Just two guys Nancy must have paid under the table. If Nancy was reckless enough to send them once, she'd do it again. I decided to be ready. The very next day, a marked security vehicle rolled into my driveway with flashing amber lights. Its vinyl decals read, HOA Code Enforcement, words that don't exist anywhere in state law. Out stepped the same two fake officers, but this time they weren't just holding clipboards. They carried zip ties like they were about to haul me off. They didn't know yet who they were dealing with. The taller one barked, "Sir, under HOA Code Enforcement you're under arrest. Step aside or we'll have to use force." I almost laughed. HOA Code Enforcement? There's no such thing. Under Title 18, U.S. Code 912, impersonating an officer is a federal crime. They weren't just bluffing, they were committing a felony right there on my property. I raised my hands casually, pretending to comply. All right, I said, stepping down my porch stairs. My neighbors peeked from behind curtains, unsure whether to call 911 or mind their business. But as soon as the first man reached for me, my training kicked in. Years of defensive tactics came back automatically. I snatched his wrist, twisted, and dropped him to the ground before he even realized what happened. His knee bent the wrong way with a sickening pop. He screamed, clutching it as he tried to crawl back toward their fake patrol car. The second lunged forward, zip ties ready. I shifted my weight, hooked his ankle, and sent him sprawling face first onto the pavement. His knee slammed, dislocating on impact. He howled, trying to drag himself upright, but the moment he moved, the joint gave way. Both men were crawling now, moaning in pain, begging me not to hit them again. I didn't need to. They were already done. I pulled out my real badge, the one issued by the county, not laminated at a print shop. I crouched next to them and said calmly, "You boys just impersonated peace officers, trespassed, and attempted unlawful detention. That means you're both looking at prison time." Their faces drained. The tough guy act evaporated instantly. While they writhed on the ground, I called dispatch. Within minutes, two of my real officers rolled up, guns drawn, sirens wailing. They secured the imposters, read them their rights, and loaded them into the back of a squad car. Neighbors peeked through blinds, whispering, realizing this wasn't some HOA drama anymore. This was a criminal takedown. But the best part was still to come, because those two weren't acting alone. Someone with power in the HOA had sent them, and I already knew exactly who. At the station, the fake officers cracked almost immediately. Under questioning, one of them admitted they weren't just freelancing. Someone in the HOA had promised them a hefty payout to teach me a lesson. That someone was none other than Nancy Grant. I wasn't surprised. Nancy had been gunning for me ever since I cited her son last year for reckless driving. She thought she could use intimidation to push me out of the neighborhood, maybe even ruin my career. Instead, she just tied her name to a federal case. The charges stacked up quickly: impersonating a police officer under 18 U.S. Code 912, conspiracy, attempted unlawful detention, and trespassing. Each carried real prison time. And because she orchestrated it, Nancy wasn't going to hide behind HOA rules anymore. She was looking at felony-level accountability. When my officers brought Nancy in, she tried her usual smug routine: arms crossed, chin raised, as if she was still in charge of the block. "This is a misunderstanding," she said coolly. "I was only trying to protect the community. I have authority as HOA president." I leaned across the table in the interrogation room and slid a thick file toward her. The fluorescent light hummed overhead, casting shadows across the documents. Inside were sworn statements from the imposters, photographs of the fake badges, and high-definition footage from my security cameras showing her men marching up my driveway with zip ties. Her lawyer, a slick man in a tailored suit, reached for the file first. He tried to mask his concern as he flipped through the evidence, but the way his brow tightened told the truth. Nancy's confidence faltered. The color drained from her cheeks as she saw the close-up shots of the counterfeit badges, complete with the cheap plastic lamination. "This isn't a misunderstanding, Nancy," I told her, my voice steady. "This is a criminal conspiracy and you're done." For the first time her eyes flickered, a crack in her armor. Her lawyer cleared his throat. "Chief, with all due respect, my client was misled. These men acted on their own. She never authorized." I cut him off. "They already confessed she paid them. And guess what? One of them recorded your client promising a payout. Audio's clean. It's over." Nancy's head jerked toward her attorney, betrayal and panic flashing across her face. Within hours she was booked. No clipboard, no neighborhood stage, no power, just a mugshot. Her carefully cultivated image of control shattered under the weight of federal charges. The following day, the HOA board called an emergency meeting inside the community clubhouse. The room was packed. For years, most neighbors had been too scared to stand up to Nancy. She'd fined people for garden gnomes, for kids' bicycles left on lawns, even for leaving trash cans out an hour too long. Her power had always come from intimidation, not legitimacy. But that night, the fear was gone. I attended, not as the chief of police, but as a homeowner. I sat quietly in the back, letting the board and the residents decide her fate. One elderly woman stood up first, her voice trembling but determined. "For years Nancy has bullied us. She fined me $200 because my roses grew outside the border. I was too afraid to fight back, but now I see she was nothing but a fraud." Applause broke out. Another man rose, waving a stack of old HOA citations. "She tried to take my backyard shed down, said it wasn't approved. Now I know she was just power-hungry." The vote came swiftly, unanimous. Nancy was stripped of her position, fined for legal costs, and banned from ever holding office in any HOA again. For the first time in years, the clubhouse felt lighter. People laughed, shook hands, and even made plans for a community barbecue, something Nancy had banned because she claimed grills violated fire aesthetics. Both men pled guilty to impersonating officers and unlawful detention. Their pleas earned them reduced time, but prison was still inevitable. They'd limp into their sentences once their knees healed, carrying the memory of that day on my driveway. In their confessions, both admitted Nancy had promised them not only money but influence. She told them they'd be the official HOA enforcement division once she cemented her rule. The idea of two ordinary men walking around with fake badges and clipboards like a private army was chilling. I drove home that evening with a strange mix of emotions. Relief, because justice had prevailed, but also anger, because it had gone this far at all. Standing on my porch, coffee in hand, I watched neighbors stroll by. People waved at me now, stopping to chat, no longer avoiding eye contact out of fear of HOA retaliation. Kids rode bikes, laughing freely without Nancy scolding them for leaving tire marks. Homes that once looked sterile now displayed small flower pots and wind chimes. The neighborhood was alive again. It struck me then. Nancy had nearly convinced an entire community that her rules were the law. That's the danger of unchecked authority. People will accept control if they believe resistance is pointless. But resistance wasn't pointless. Not when you stand on the side of actual law. Weeks later, Nancy's case made headlines in the county paper. HOA president charged in officer impersonation scheme. The article detailed her charges: conspiracy, solicitation, and aiding and abetting impersonation of a peace officer. It explained how her obsession with power spiraled into criminal behavior. For the first time her name wasn't feared, it was ridiculed. At trial her lawyer tried one last desperate angle, painting her as a misunderstood leader, who simply made a mistake. But the jury didn't buy it. The recordings, the fake badges, the testimony from Craig and Dylan, it was ironclad. The prosecutor looked directly at the jurors in his closing statement. "Ladies and gentlemen, this isn't about parking tickets or lawn decorations.